For the people that are my mentors today, Elena, Pacifica, Teddy, and Jamie, we're just going to go down the list of, like, in the email I sent you. I figured, why not? Let's just do that. So you guys are going to just talk about your programs for like 5 to 8 minutes, just a little bit of like general overview, and then the things that we kind of talked about in the emails. If you want to touch on that, that would be great. And then we're just going to open up to our fellow Fajobis to kind of ask questions. And if they don't, then I think it makes sense for us to talk to each other, because you guys are all doing, you kind of have a similar audience. So this mentor chat, just so we are aware, is about outreach. Generally, like, we're thinking in the STEM field for younger audiences, so under 18. And so I thought it would be good to kind of talk about the challenges and what works in your eyes and what doesn't work, so that if you are looking to start your own outreach thing, you're not doing it from scratch, which is great. So Elena, do you want to talk to us about your program for like 5 minutes? And I'll come in and hook you off stage out of love if it gets too crazy.
Okay, I'll try to keep it short. So my name is Elena Sulia. I'm a second-year PhD student at UC Davis in the population biology program. I study plants. And the program that I'm going to talk about is called STEM Squad, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Math Squad, which is an after-school science program facilitated by this equity in STEM and engineering and entrepreneurship grad group at UC Davis, in partnership with 2 local middle schools. And I'll send you the link afterwards for the chat function. So we started this program because while we think that all types of outreach programs are important and valuable, we really wanted to do something that was both sustainable and long-term, and also something that reached underrepresented and disadvantaged youth in particular, to avoid preaching to the choir. So we partnered with 2 local schools that fit these criteria in different ways, and started the STEM Squad, which is twice a month. We lead hands-on STEM activities after school with the goal of creating an open learning environment for students to explore and experience science and technology. So we had monthly themes. This was our first year doing it. Computer science, engineering, evolution, chemistry, ecology, that kind of thing. And each month we brought in one speaker who has a career in that field to give a brief presentation about how they got to where they are, and the challenges that they faced along the way. So that's the 30,000-foot view of the program. Some challenges that we faced, some of them were universal, some were specific to the school that we were working in. So overall, I think the biggest issue was logistics. We had to be mindful of the fact that many students would only be able to participate if they could take the late bus. And so that limited us to 1 day for each school when the late bus actually came, and also only 50 minutes to do setup, actually have the activity, teach the lesson, clean up and everything, which is not a lot of time for middle schoolers. So that was probably the biggest challenge. Another was one of the schools in particular was more socioeconomically disadvantaged, so we had to do all of our own fundraising for that, which was not something we necessarily expected to have to do going in. But we made it work. And then another for both schools was, how do you make the lessons both challenging and accessible, especially when there's a wide range of skill levels? So we tried to design activities as best we could with multiple levels so that students could progress at their own pace, which worked in some instances. Like we had a computer science lesson where the kids could just be on their own computers and kind of progress through the levels. But for some activities that didn't work, like we had a group airplane building project where they really kind of all had to work together and do the same thing. And then many students were English language learners and primarily spoke Spanish in their homes. So we actually had a teacher in the classroom who would have to translate a lot of what we were saying to the students. And we had to be aware, both while we were communicating the lesson plans to them, and also when we were designing handouts, to be as clear as possible and try not to use jargon. And for PhD students, that can be really hard. And so we're also thinking about how tackling these challenges is something that like professional teachers and educators have to deal with all the time, and it's hard for them. And for us, we've had zero training in like professional education. And so as grad students, that was tricky. But as a pilot year, I think it worked out pretty well. One of the schools was a small Catholic charter school, and that was a little tricky for its own reasons. The school hadn't had a science teacher for years, and so we were essentially providing the students with their only science education. And that was a little daunting for a bunch of young grad students, and also meant that we had to think very carefully about lesson planning and make sure we had no assumptions of any prior knowledge of a given topic. And when we were teaching the evolution section, we were really cognizant of the fact that this was a Catholic school and we wanted to respect that fact. So we sent home letters to the students' parents before the lessons explaining what we were doing and why we thought it was important that students be exposed to this branch of science. So it really just took a lot of care and thought to design this program. And I guess the last point was what worked best. And so to sort of figure out what we thought worked best based on the volunteers' experiences, the teachers in the classroom, and the students, we gave out surveys. And they all seemed to really like the activities. So I think overall the pilot year went well. The students and the teachers had very different criticisms to give us. So I think, you know, these are middle school students. Some of them were goofing off during the surveys. Some of them were just saying, we don't like this, you know. So we paid a lot of attention to the teachers' criticism. So one thing we want to do next year is actually sit down with the teachers and design the lesson plans with them. We found out during some of the activities that the kids had already done them before. And so there was a lack of communication some of the time, but I think that just comes with like starting a new program and really working out the kinks during the first year. And I think from a volunteer standpoint, getting the professionals to like actually come, we had one woman like come from San Jose up to Davis, which is near Sacramento. And it was just like a lot of logisticizing that was difficult for us. So it seemed like it wasn't necessarily. But the teachers and the kids liked the professionals coming in as like one of their favorite parts of the program. So we decided we were just gonna keep on going with that.
Okay, great. So I think that's a really good and succinct overview. I mean, like I said, I think we'll introduce everybody, but I've been taking extensive notes, and I think that a lot of those logistics are a lot of those challenges, like you said, are kind of like all encompassing to any new program, but there are kind of a couple of like specific ones that I think are really interesting. So. All right, so thank you, Elena. Silent clap from the room. Thank you. Okay, Pacifica, do you want to talk about your overnight school, and is it bring your own sleeping bag? Did you have to provide them? And also, what were you thinking having all of these children? Did anybody sleep is my first question. And second, go ahead, I'll let you have the floor.
Yeah, well, I will say that one of our key points of this model is that teachers come with their classes. So we have other chaperones in the dorms with the kids, and then the grad students who are actually doing the instructing during the day sleep in a different building so that we are not responsible for like the care and feeding and like homesickness and nighttime vomiting and all the other stuff.
I do like that you called it feeding instead of, so, all right, cool. Let us know about your program and I'll come cut you off in 5 minutes. How's that sound?
Yeah, great. So the program is called the University of Arizona Science Sky School. If anybody wants to look that up, if you Google UA Science Sky School, you'll find the website. I think it's uaskyschool.org or something. So this was a program that I helped to launch in 2012. And the model right now is it's based at primarily our main location is at the summit of Mount Lemmon, which is about an hour's drive up a mountain highway from Tucson, Arizona. And there's an astronomy observatory there. It was originally an Air Force base in the 50s that was turned into an astronomy observatory. And now that most astronomers do things remotely, they don't use the dorms anymore. So we saw this site being basically unused that could be a great research site, not only to do astronomy and kind of, which ends up being a little bit more show and tell with the students, but also to mentor students in outdoor science research. So the model, our flagship program, is that school classes or other groups with chaperones, it could be a Girl Scout troop, or it could be some other kind of program, come up to the summit of Mount Lemmon, and they are divided into groups of about 4 to 6 students, ideally more like 4, but 6 would be on the big end. And each one of those students has a graduate student as their research advisor for the next, it's a 4-day program, 4 days, 3 nights. And so on the first day, we have a range of ages, and we approach this differently. On the first day, we're doing basically workshops to introduce them to the fields of study of different graduate students. So geologists will have a station where students are breaking rocks apart with rock hammers. Soil scientists will have a station where they're doing texture and feel of soils. Plant biologists will have a station where they're measuring plant cover, doing something with plant phenology. Animal biologists might have game cameras, or, so we have different workshops, coring trees. There's a lot of different opportunities for different kinds of science, atmospheric science, all of that. And then on day 2, they really start their research project. So in their groups with their mentor, the students come up with a question, a hypothesis, some methods to go out and test this. And they start collecting data. And then on day 3, they're able to finish collecting their data. And by that evening, they create a presentation. We do not allow them to use PowerPoints. They have to make posters, and those posters will go back with them to their schools. They usually make like a series of 4 to 5 posters so that they can actually make graphs big enough for people to see. And they do basically a scientific presentation of question, hypothesis, methods, results, interpretation and conclusions, and then very importantly, why would this research matter to anybody? What's its relevance to society? And so they do that after dinner on the 3rd night. And then the 4th morning is sort of wrap up. We always do a reflection circle at the end. And so the logistic, and then in the evenings, they're doing different evening activities, going out to the telescopes if it's clear, to look through 26-inch or 32-inch telescopes, which are enormous, and in these big domes. And then we have sort of alternate activities, either star-related or indoor activities if it's too cloudy, or just if we have too big of a group to have everybody in the dome at once. And so we have a variety of ages that come up. So obviously high school students can really kind of run with this model, but we've had students as young as 4th and 5th grades do these programs. And you basically you expect a different level of sophistication and of analysis, and different hiking speeds, but you'd be really impressed with what 5th graders can do, and what they can come up with, and what they can learn in a couple days. And so, yeah, you have to think about what grade level and what school they're coming from. So the way we actually piloted this was I wrote a grant. I got a NASA University of Arizona Space Grant Outreach Fellowship that funded my PhD work for 2 years. And I was basically the point person on piloting these. So a friend of mine had actually worked at the McCall Outdoor Science School, MOST, in Idaho, which has a similar model. So he was the one who actually came up with this idea of like, hey, there's an observatory that's kind of unused here. Like, wouldn't that be cool? But he was going to Denmark on an NSF fellowship for a few months, and I needed funding. And I said, hey, what do you think if I apply for this and I start piloting these? And he was excited about that, put me in touch with the director of this observatory, who was somebody, and this is something that I think was key to really getting it started, was getting the person with really the authority to oversee this program on board early. He was really enthusiastic about it. And it's a ton of work for him, but like, this is, really his calling in life. And he's been able to make this a bigger part of his job, which has changed his career, and in a good way, that he's really excited about. And he's our most enthusiastic fundraiser. So this was in 2012 that we started this. Our first 4-day program was in the spring of 2013. That same school came up for a 4-day program in this spring. And I'm a postdoc now at Colorado, have been for the last couple of years, but I went back to help out with that program and be there Our model initially was also our hearts are all in serving underserved Title I schools, and so from the start we got grants from Sierra Club and private foundations and other sources to be able to help allay the cost for students. And in particular, the school that came up that first 4-day program, we'd kind of tiptoed into this, doing single overnights where the students didn't do the full scientific project first, sort of like, and we sort of built from there, piloted it small, built out from there. In this particular school, their superintendent raises all the money for all of the students, all 40 students, with his Rotary Club. And so they're just great students from a very low income part of Tucson. And that was really great to be able to go back and see that and see how that program is growing and expanding. So to answer your question about the sleeping bags, we do have them bring sleeping bags and, or at least like a sheet or a blanket or something. So we do tell kids to bring sleeping bags, and we try to help find sleeping bags or other bedding if, it's low-income students that don't necessarily have them.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'm very glad that you took my sleeping bag question seriously, and thank you for answering that. First of all, that program sounds amazing. I will speak for all of us. I put a link to it in the chat, and it's so cool. I mean, it's like a very cool facility, so I get it. Okay, well, I have a lot of questions, and I think that I will save them. Okay, so the next person to talk is going to be me on behalf of Audrey. So we have a Fajobi who did something that, so as you can tell from Elena and Pacifica's kind of outreach, is that is a lot of work. It's like multiple people, multiple year funding from every different place, whatever. And so, outreach doesn't necessarily have to be that intense. And so I was talking with one of our other Fajobis, and she started a letter writing campaign. And so what she basically did was matched one scientist with one like grade school aged kid, and they would write pen pal style letters to each other. And then after they wrote a specific series of letters, they all met up at the end and got to meet their scientist or meet their student, and kind of had already like developed this kind of relationship, and then got to meet each other. And the things that I like about this program are that they're like relatively low lift. So, this isn't something that's it's a lot of logistical stuff and organization, but it's something that you could feasibly do without necessarily having to get like a grant from NASA, for example. So she wrote me a couple of things that she said that would be cool to share. So some of the things that worked and didn't work, because I think this is kind of the program that a program that would be easy to implement or to kind of run with, and talking to Audrey might be a really good idea. So she said, you have to make sure that you get people that are really dedicated to do it, so that, you're not like telling a kid they're going to get a letter and not get a letter. She put out like 3 tasks for people to do, like a short survey, sign up on a Google Sheet and put their email in, so that, she made sure that those people were, I guess, had enough follow through to do those things. And then she said another thing is to reach out of all the STEM departments that you can think of. Like for me, I had my PhD in microbiology, so I immediately think like life sciences, but she said some of the best pen pals were graduate students that were studying speech disorders in the speech therapy department, and in some exercise physiologists that also did that. And then she said that another thing that they did was they would ask their kids in their letters what were their favorite hobbies, for example, like cooking or playing with Legos, talking to friends, and then they would try to tie links between that with chemistry or engineering or psychology, respectively. And then, when you couldn't match a kid with a career like STEM professional that they wanted to be matched with, I matched them based on general interests like Star Wars and karate, and that worked really well. And she said that works better than random matches. Like, hey, would you like to talk to a biologist? Would you like to talk to a physicist? And if those kids didn't want to talk to either of those, instead of just, randomly matching, they would have like kind of a little profile of the kid and then match them to people with similar interests. So I think that's a really cool program. Another program that's kind of similar to that we have an affiliation as Friends of Joe's Big Idea is the Skype a Scientist program. I might have Sarah come on and do an independent mentor chat because she's built like this nationwide organization. But that's an organization where you literally sign up to Skype with some kids in a high school or in a grade school, and it literally takes like 2 hours of your time and you're sitting in your lab. It could be like during an incubation period. So one thing to keep in mind with all this outreach, if you're feeling intimidated, is that not all outreach has to be super intense, all time consuming stuff, right? You can pick up small programs or time and just get like start messing around with it. Like I would, when I was in Rochester, I volunteered at a museum for like 1 or 2 hours a weekend and just started that way. And it was a really good way to find out what you like. So anyways, so that was Audrey's program. Let me see where Audrey's from. I forget. Audrey Moran. I'll let you know what her university affiliation is. But I thought it was kind of a cool program and definitely a different program. Okay, Teddy, are you ready to talk about how you somehow taught 6-year-olds about microbes without them going into a pure panic? Because I need some help with my nephew.
So Mega Microbe is the program Madeline's talking about. We were targeting 6 through 14-year-olds with their parents. And so this program started because I'm at Vanderbilt University. I'm a 5th-year graduate student. We wanted to do some sort of kind of community engagement in microbiology in the greater Nashville area. And so talking with a few microbiology professors, we were trying to think about what would be a good program. And right now in several different departments that work with microbiology, we kind of do our own thing. Each lab has their own little program that they do. There are a couple other bigger ones through the whole university, but nothing that kind of connected all of the microbiologists, whether they're in biological sciences like my department, microbiology, pharmacology. All of these can have relationships to microbiology. So we wanted to set up a one-time event, see how it went. This was last year, to try to set up a booth-style event to try to engage this younger group in microbiology, which is not an easy feat, like Madeline said. Microbiology cannot be easily seen. But we kind of were targeting this idea that we need to make it activity-based, very interactive, and kind of build up from there, where we have some sort of fun, engaging analogy to a particular microbiology concept. So, for instance, one of my favorite booths was a booth about biofilms, and so how microbiology or communities can kind of assemble these biofilms to help protect them against antibiotics, or to group themselves on any sort of surface, whether it's a catheter tube or in your own gut. And so what they did was they turned biofilms into a city. And the kids basically had their own silly putty kind of oobleck-like substance that was their biofilm. And they learned what a biofilm is based off of taking different types of glitter, and each glitter was its own type of microbe. And so a green glitter could have been E. coli. Another one could have been a Clostridium species, and each of them have their own function. Like a city has a plumber, a city has potentially a defender, or could have a leader, or any sort of function. And then basically they took each glitter, made their own community, and at the end you see this either very pretty or maybe a mess of different glitter on this oobleck, and the kids get to take that home. And so they have something to look at, to play around with, and hopefully by doing that, they gain some knowledge about a fundamental level of biofilm, regardless of how in-depth it got. And the beauty of that is that we have biofilm lab experts there. So if we have a kid over 6 who wants to know more, they're right there. And while we were there, one of the other kind of parts of the event that we wanted to focus on was also trying to describe antibiotic resistance in vaccines to their parents as well as to the kids. And so a couple booths we had was, we have a Vanderbilt Vaccine Center. We got the best person from that center to basically be the question person there. And it was amazing how many parents just asked whatever questions they could about vaccines. And she does this for a living, just talking about the importance of vaccines. And we only got positive reviews from the parents who went to that table, which was really fantastic. And so these were some really great things about this first year event. But one thing we noticed was we got about 235 kids. I'd say about 50% of them have some sort of relationship to Vanderbilt, which is great, but we want to make it a Nashville event rather than just a Vanderbilt event. And so the next step is really engaging the schools, also engaging the teachers, because just having an event that brings kids in the door doesn't necessarily sustain the kind of microbiology knowledge we wanted. So we were trying to hope to engage teachers by maybe creating lesson plans based off of the booth, or create resources where if this is a cool concept you want to teach in your class, here's something you could use to add it to your curriculum. Or if you need advice, here is a lab that works on it, let us know. And so we're trying to, in year 2, gradually transfer this kind of inviting the teacher in, getting a more sustained curriculum, community-based feel for this event, rather than what the first year was does it work, maybe a bit more of a one and done type of event. And then hopefully in future years, as some of the previous talkers mentioned, trying to get a more diverse community there. So engaging underrepresented communities, trying to get outside of just Vanderbilt, our little bubble, and trying to target all aspects of Nashville. And so I think this is kind of what we have moving forward. And the hard part is trying to navigate what the school necessarily wants to do and what we want to build it into. Because there are always kind of checks and balances where we might want to push really hard, but the school is just like, no, let's try this event first, see if it works. Let's add some teachers in and gradually build it up so we don't try to build too much and then it topples over. And so another thing is also going to be, how do we best engage the teachers? This is a question we're trying to really reach out to the local schools this year and try to understand, as a scientist, this is what we'd love to teach you, but it might not help with your curriculum by any means. So we want to work with them rather than give them the resources and know what they're going to be used for.
Awesome, Teddy. Okay, so there was a lot of awesome stuff in there. I mean, the child plus parent kind of vibe is such an awesome outreach opportunity when you use it exactly like you did. At the museum that I used to hang around at, it was like, we're doing this for the kids, but we're also trying to do this for the parents. You know what I mean? I mean, like having a Ask Me Anything vaccine table is like unbelievably smart. And that's the kind of thing is you kind of have to get the kids and their parents excited if you want to have any, in my opinion, if you want to have any long-term success with that kid, because they're only going to be able to do the things that their parents allow them to do, essentially. The other thing that I keep hearing people say, which I really like, is, you know, that we are trying to engage with people outside of a community of self-selecting science nerds, right? So like I volunteered in a museum for a couple of years, but then I was like, you know, the people that are here are either here because they want me to watch their kids or here because they've already bought into science. And those are not the people that we need to engage. A person that would be another person that is really awesome and somebody that I sent a big email out about, Nalini Nankarni, is at the University of Utah. And she is a specialist in putting people in, like, she's famous for going into prisons and churches to do science communication. And the way that she does that is that, you know, we all have an in somewhere. We all have, you know, like I'm from a very small, like rural town in Ohio, and there's a lot of science communication that needs to happen in that place. And you kind of already have a step or a foot in if you grew up in that area, right? So people people don't make decisions based on how much information they have. We know that now. The people would do the right thing if they only had the right information. That information deficit model is completely dead. And so, you know, people trust people that they can relate to, people that they know, people that they trust that person. And so, you know, don't forget that you yourself have a place and a culture and a time that you already get into, and you can use that to kind of make that impact. So stepping outside of going to doing stuff just at museums labs or even like doing, you know, science stuff at your university, the people there are pretty bought in. Those people need to be engaged consistently through life, and they will be. But if you're really trying to reach people outside of it, it's a different situation. Okay, so Jamie is going to talk to us about her electronic style outreach. Jamie, is that correct? You're doing some kind of computers? Is that what the files are in the computer? Okay, and
Yeah.
Jamie, do you have to go right at 1? Is that the case?
No, I'm good.
Okay, one of our mentors has to go right at 1.
That's me.
Okay, cool. So after Jamie tells us all about her stuff, we will just start questions for Pacifica so she can take off when she needs to. Does that sound good? Cool. All right, Jamie, tell us about it.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to meet you all and see what you're doing. My name is Jamie Lowitzo. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Florida. I recently came here from the University of Nebraska, where you had a cool SciComm event, and that's how I found out about all this. So I'm very excited to be here and nerd out about a lot of stuff with you. So I have a project called Streaming Science. It's streamingscience.com, and in my role, it's my job to sort of prepare the next generation of science communicators when it comes to agriculture and the environment. So I work a lot with things like the Extension Service, or here in Florida now we have like the Sea Grant and all these cool things that we can work with. So streaming science has kind of become just something I dreamt up. Haven't really had anything but just little partnership funding for it here and there with different commodity groups or things like that. But it's a WordPress site, streamingscience.com. And then I have my students in my undergraduate and graduate courses actually create multimedia projects to meet a scientist like yourself, to have to help create a video, a podcast, an electronic field trip, all things geared toward middle and high school audiences. Because I realized they were getting bachelor's of science degrees without ever having met a scientist. They were spending a lot of time trying to tell the story of agriculture and things like that, which is really important, but they weren't talking to people who were actually doing the science of agriculture or the science of the environment. So now it's my mission that they will not graduate on my watch without having been in the field with scientists or in labs or uncomfortable spaces other than their own natural environments out in agriculture. So we use a lot of multimedia gear. We keep it mobile because a lot of my students are going to work in public relations positions for things like a farm bureau or you know, the Corn Board or the Cattlemen's Association or things like that. So everything is mobile on an iPad. It's the iographer.com. He's super cool high school media arts teacher who patented this case that fits on your iPad and has lenses and lights and tripods and all this stuff. And then we use a lot of apps like Filmic Pro is an app, Switcher Studio. I can put all this in the chat thing for you to see what it is. It's pretty cost effective. One mobile kit is like $1,200 total. So you can definitely build this kind of stuff into grant projects and things like that. Now, the online materials, we haven't had the best luck at tracking like who's listening, who's watching, that sort of thing yet. We haven't really focused on that just yet. We've really focused on the electronic field trips and determining how it's impacting schools and learners that are engaging with us. So we do a live 45-minute web streamed broadcast from the middle of nowhere. We did it in the Sandhills of Nebraska. We had like 2 bars of internet. We were lucky it was even working, but I was determined to be out in the middle of nowhere and give it a try. So we record some footage and things with the scientists ahead of time, take photos, and then we work with teachers in schools, predominantly in middle and high schools. And we really have to do a lot of work on the implementation piece of the whole thing with the teachers in the schools. That's the hardest part. They really like your content to be based on the next generation science standards. And sort of the 2 pieces of those science standards that work really well for us are things related to science careers, because they want to introduce their students to scientists and careers, and scientific inquiry and the nature of science. So showing how a scientist works, how you go from hypothesis to data collection, what technologies you're using, all of that helps the teachers finally feel like, oh, I can give up class time to this program because they're going to actually help me hit some of the standards I'm supposed to be covering in my classroom. If you don't sort of kind of coach them and help them understand that you're helping them teach to the standards, they kind of panic and freak out a little bit because they are concerned about standardized testing and meeting the goals that they're supposed to meet with their students. So we do spend time with the teacher's guide, writing learning objectives, helping them see how we're meeting the standards, and then also helping them understand how they can watch this program in their classroom and how to connect to it. They don't like Facebook, they don't like YouTube, they don't like anything sort of social media because most of their schools have that stuff firewalled and they don't want a kid playing around on YouTube all day. So we went with Ustream.tv to live stream our broadcasts. And so it's an IBM streaming server, and they're happy with that sort of thing. So we've had to do some different testing of technology along the way to see what's acceptable to schools and what's not. And then we do a pre and post assessment with the students who watch and participate. So we'll have like a 15-minute segment where a scientist talks through their research and shows off pieces of it. And then we'll have like a 5 to 10-minute question answer period where the students type in questions just like you're doing in the chat box here. But in 45 minutes, we get hundreds of questions. And that's the other part we haven't figured out quite yet what to do with, because we can't answer all of those questions. And then so we also do the pre and post assessment where we'll do things like the Draw a Scientist test is a measure that's out there to see changes in science stereotypes. We've already proven we can change their attitudes about scientists. So now we're looking at how can we actually gauge changes in content knowledge. We wanted them to learn about ecosystems in the sandhills and the types of animals that live there and the types of foods and plants and water and how it's all connected. So we had them do other types of content related questions and other types of drawings about the content. We're still analyzing all that stuff. But it's a great program. It's effective and affordable. We're putting a lot of information out and we're engaging with schools. We're wanting to move into also after school programs. Yes, we'll have like up to 7 or 8 schools connected at a time, which is 300 to 400 students watching all at once. So it's pretty cool.
Are they live?
Yeah, we're doing it at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. so we can kind of hit them 2 times in the school day.
Right.
So we might have a teacher sign up 2 classes and she logs in twice that day. Some schools are bringing all of their kids to the cafeteria or the gym and they're watching it together.
And tell me again real quick, Jamie, I'm just like, this is so cool. So how are they going and signing up? Do you guys have a website or is it like something that is already built that you are just in, or what's that about?
So honestly, we're pretty low tech with our WordPress site and our Google form. We have a Google form where we recruit the schools to come to and sign up. I now kind of have an email list serve going of typical schools that know of us and like us now. They know to go to the Google form, tell me who they are, tell me what grades, how they're going to use it, how they're going to log in and that sort of thing. We luckily, if you have any sort of connection to a college of agriculture, there's always the extension service that has an extension agent in every county that will reach out to their local schools for you. Also, museums, like you're saying, a lot of times have a field trip list and you can email those teachers. There's like a million ways online. There's always an agriculture teacher, high school listserv. You reach out to your state agriculture group.
Well, that's really cool, and and you get hundreds of questions. I mean, that's wild. I could, my greatest fear is to build a program like this and then nobody watches it. You know what I mean? And was it like that in the beginning, or?
So at first we piloted it with 4 schools and we just kept it super controlled because we were the same way. We were like, first of all, we're not sure if the Wi-Fi connection is strong enough and if they're even going to be able to see us from the middle of nowhere. And then second of all, we did a second year iteration of it where then we said, we just advertised it throughout the whole state, let anybody know about it in Nebraska that might be interested. And now I think we're ready to go live with anybody and just try it. So I'll have a graduate student class producing an electronic field trip this November about bat research from our bat houses on campus. And we're going to just go live with anybody and everybody that wants to sign up.
I'm coming. I'm going live. That sounds awesome. All right, cool. So, okay, so if anybody has any questions specifically for Pacifica, then do them now. And if not, we'll kind of open it up for more general questions. I have a question for you, Pacifica, because I know you guys are just going to sit there and stare at me like I'm a big dummy.
I have a question.
Yes!
So, Pacifica, you mentioned that
Who are you and where are you?
I'm Miley. I'm in Utah right now.
Cool.
And so you mentioned that you aren't at the University of Arizona anymore, but that you've like still kind of been involved. So I am an undergraduate doing an outreach program with the Society of Physics students on campus. And my biggest concern as a senior this year is that I'm going to leave and the whole thing is just going to like fall to pieces. So my question is like, how are you passing the torch and how are you trying to like keep that going throughout the years? And if anyone else has advice about that for like keeping outreach groups going, that would be great to hear too.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that was one of the key reasons why having somebody who was currently a faculty or staff person, the director for this this observatory on board was key, because he is permanent there and he does have power to like do budgets and like pay grad student stipends. And so he was basically part-time just running these like sort of public observing, like, you know, adults usually coming up to pay like $60 to like get a show and tell at the telescope for the evening. And he really wanted to do more like education with students. So he was really excited about this and ended up working with his bosses to build this into his job, so that he spends a large part of his time actually running this program now, and also hired a second person to help do some of the on-the-ground logistics, and also hired somebody to do the cooking while we're up there, because it turns out having just the people who are also trying to do the educating put together food is not really logistically feasible. And so having permanent staff is one key thing, and having funding involved so that we have not only somebody to, like grad students are receiving a stipend for, the 20 days that they spend each year on the mountain doing these instruction, because time is valuable. They get like, I think $5,000 for the year for 20 days on the mountain at this point. But having that permanent staff. And so for a more like volunteer-based and student-run outreach program, that's going to be tougher if you don't have the institutional permanence. And so I don't know if you can't identify somebody who's the next person who's actually passionate about it to like really be the point person and invest in it. Finding that person is really key, right? Like, as you probably know, like just having the person who's invested.
Yeah, and I think that's been like one of the biggest challenges, because the club has had like a different advisor each year, and it's just like someone who gets assigned to it. So, and then like the department advisor is really, really loves it, but she has so many responsibilities. It's hard for her to.
I can tell you that I had a couple of outreach programs at the University of Rochester that I started when I was there. And I can't agree with Pacifica enough. And one of the ways that you can do it without kind of assigning it to one person is if your university has some kind of society so not a society, but somebody in professional development or career development or an outreach person, if you can.
That's like what we are. Like all of SPS is like all of that.
Okay.
So we're doing a lot.
Yeah, what I got them to do was to consider it with our Center for Professional Development was basically to just write it into their programming, so that somewhere on the funding that was coming from.
You mean like the campus-wide one?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh.
So
okay.
what I did was I took it to the Center for Professional Development. I said, I've already started this program. I already have all of these best practices. And I also identified a couple of graduate students that were younger than me that were associated with it that said that they would step in and help. And so you obviously need to have, if you're a volunteer organization, no matter what, you're going to have to get the next generation of volunteers ready to go, or iteration rather, not generation. But I got the campus to write it into one of their outreach programs through the Center for Professional Development, and then that has some accountability for the university to support it. And so that's what I did. You can try that. But yeah, I mean, basically, you know, if you can find somebody passionate enough and excited enough about it to keep going, you're probably going to be fine. But getting it written in somewhere and getting some kind of champion with some authority at a faculty level who's going to be there is so huge. That's exactly what I did. We had written into the professional development, and you needed a faculty advisor, and we had a faculty advisor that was willing to do it. So that's what I would say. Try to tie it to some kind of money if you can, that's how academia works. Cool. Anybody else have any advice for Miley on keeping something going after you leave? No? I can tell you, Miley, that I started a program that had almost no university backing whatsoever and just had a couple of gunners behind me that were really great. And I think it's better than when I did it. Like, I'm glad I got out of their way. It's been, yeah. It can survive. It can.
I'm writing you about, well, Science Line is funded. I'm in the process of writing a follow-up cat post about how Science Line works.
Okay, great.
Send.
Okay.
Well, thanks everybody. That actually does help a lot.
Great. Who else we got? Another question? For the whole group or for Pacifica?
Can I just answer an unasked question really quick? Just a couple of things that I thought about that I didn't say. Somebody else brought up assessments, and we started, and that's huge for basically going to your donors then. And so one thing that we did was we just started out with like a simple sort of pre-test, post-test on some content knowledge and some attitudes about like, I could see myself as a scientist, or I know what scientists do. And then we started later on, as we got more funding, started working with NSF evaluators on campus to design a more long-term and like more sort of social science robust sort of evaluation instrument about different elements of science.
Pacifica, I don't know, one thing I thought would be really helpful for our community is if we shared what we use for our assessment materials. I don't know if that's okay with the NSF, but if you guys would be willing, our Fajobi mentors today, to share what kind of assessment materials you use. It's so important. I mean, like you guys know with us, we are constantly sending you surveys and assessment stuff, specifically if you are in the office hours program or whatever, because, you know, not only is it really important for getting funding and grant funding, but it's so important for us to learn, you know, for me with you guys to learn what's working, what's not working, what you want more resources in, what you don't. And sometimes you just like can't anticipate that. And so assessment is something that I'm not particularly good at as a community leader, but something that is really, really important. So maybe that would be cool if we all shared kind of our assessment material, because you can ask, and you can also write really bad assessment stuff. You know what I mean? Like I've asked questions where I'm like, what am I going to do with this data? Why did I need to know that? And so I think maybe it would be really cool if we all shared ours. So something to think about.
Yeah, I'll reach out to the director to get the current iteration if it's been tweaked at all. Cool. Another thing I just wanted to share was sort of a lesson learned after our first like 4-day program. We got a lot of feedback from those teachers, and one of the key things was to build in more break time and more downtime and not try to cram so much in. And I think that goes for everything, whether it's the electronic, like the e-streaming field trip or an after-school program or a residential program, is just not trying. There's so much we want to share with students and so many experiences we want them to have, but we really have to prioritize and give them downtime. Even if it's a 2-hour program, like having that break, or a couple breaks depending on the age group is so key.
Cool. That's a good point. Anybody who's got another question? There's been a lot of chatting in this mentor chat, which I like. Anybody? I can see all of you. I know how many people are here. I'm going to begin to sing. And when someone asks, I'm not good at it. No, okay. I have a couple of things, kind of questions. You know, the fundraising thing. Elena, you kind of brought it up. What were some successful fundraising techniques, and what did not work that you tried?
So we wrote a proposal for one of the schools and essentially asked them for funds at the end of it, and they gave us $500, and that's all we needed for that school.
So you actually went to the school that you were working with and got them to give you money for that. Okay, that's cool.
For one of the schools. For the other one, that didn't work out so much. Fortunately, we were able to use some of the materials for both schools because it was the same activities for each school. And so if we had leftovers, we just used the materials. And some of it was, it wasn't materials that you run out of. You just reuse it over and over again. So that helped. And then we went straight to departments as well. So the chemistry department funded, I think, both of the chemistry activities for Chemistry Month. And I wasn't involved in that process, but I think they just wrote a proposal that was kind of informal for the chemistry department and had one of the chemistry grad students actually approach the department with that. So that worked well. I think one time we actually just asked one of our PIs for access to a chemical that we needed. It was kind of an expensive chemical. And so, yeah, he just let us use this $80 bucket of chemicals. So I actually don't think we had any instances where we tried to get funds and then didn't get them. So maybe we were just lucky in that regard. We also didn't need a whole lot of money for this program. It was like building bridges with popsicle sticks and stuff for the most part. So it wasn't too crazy.
Cool. Helen, did you want to say something? You've got your little paw up. Did you do that on purpose? Because I didn't.
I lucked out with sort of a one-off. My kid's elementary school principal was interested in science, and it was a school with a lot of foreign language kids and minority Vietnam refugee and then Mexican immigrants. And so he used the ESL funding. He said, well, science classes, hands-on elementary school science, this was a language activity. And so he paid me to teach several classes a year to most of the classrooms. And so that was, so I suppose you could go to a school you were interested in if they had any interest in funding.
Awesome, thank you. I will tell you that I walked around to each PI, to each dean of each department, right? So University of Rochester's Medical Center is huge. And I did a sophisticated shame begging technique that I would love for you guys all to try, which is when you say something like, do you think it's important that we engage with our community and that scientists should be able to communicate effectively? You know, it's kind of a responsibility for taxpayers. And then obviously they said, yeah. And then you say, can I have $1,000? And if you do that 8 times, you can get $4,000. And that's how I brought the Alan Alda Center to come teach scientists how to communicate effectively. And so do not overestimate the power of begging from different department heads, because as much as they tell you that they don't have money, department heads have money, deans have some money, and you don't need a lot. Especially, I was trying to get $500 from each of them, and I asked for $1,000 out of all of them. And I did that over a series of a week, and I raised $4,000 in a week. And, and it's completely dependent on your university and how bossy you are and how fast they want to get you out of the office, but it's an option. So I went to the university, the Dean of Graduate Studies at the University of Rochester. And within a week, we had raised enough money to bring a workshop in and train the scientists who would then go out into the community. So I'm just saying, I used it. Doesn't hurt. Okay, any other, we got some fundraising stuff.
I have a question again.
Yeah, that's great.
I had it earlier, but I couldn't remember what it was. So for Jeannie, you mentioned that you had looked into the standards the teachers are supposed to meet. If you could put any links in the chat maybe of where you're getting resources to find what teacher standards are, I'd really like to build some curriculums based on that.
Well, and
You might be able to reach out to the teachers, honestly.
yeah,
But
some
Is
of
that
it
the
is
best way to do
doing,
it?
some of it is doing like an informal poll of the teachers you're going to be working with, or at least a couple of them. Like, what are some important key concepts you're teaching this year that you think our program could help support? And then from there, you go sort of through the next generation science standards or the science standards for that state, which you can ask your teachers which science standards matter the most to them. And then you kind of show them, because you're still going to teach them what you're going to teach them. You're going to teach them honestly about your science, who you are, your program, but you're going to show them, look, here's how we are supporting the objectives you're trying to reach. And your content honestly may not change a whole lot, but you might remember to make certain points. Like when you coach scientists or when you're speaking, you might very directly point out to the children watching, like, this is where we are talking about scientific inquiry, which is something you should be learning in the 5th grade. Just ask your teacher, So there are ways to help the teachers feel so more comfortable. They're so anxious right now about teaching to the standardized tests. They're super anxious. And so if you can continue to point out to them how, yes, your content might feel organic to them or might feel out of the norm of what they do, but just always sort of pull them and point out to them how your stuff connects to what they're supposed to be teaching. They know their standards because they're living and breathing them and having to teach to them every day, unfortunately. But you can help show them how they relate to what you're doing, is my best advice of what I'm finding.
Okay.
I mean, that's great. I think, so it is 2:00. If there are still questions that want to be answered, I'm okay to stay here. But I thought what might be a fun activity is just for us to think about some some takeaways from this. I mean, one that I've taken away is for when you're working with teachers, you have to think about, these are people with very limited resources in almost every situation, but in very particular situations, like we're talking about when you're trying to make an impact in places that are in low resource areas, and pay attention to those standards. I mean, that's something that I feel like we all know that teachers have no money. They have to, their jobs depend on how many of their students pass these tests. So familiarizing yourself with those standards is huge, because teachers are tired, and my mom's a high school teacher. I asked her before this, what would you need to see from me if I wanted to come in and teach your class? And she said, well, I would never let you in my class, which was rude. And then she said, if someone else wanted to do it, I would say, it has to apply to the standard. It has to be, kind of a lesson plan. It has to be built, the easier you can make it for the teacher and the more you can draw that close to a standard that they already have to teach to, the easier it's going to be for you. Because we have been inspired by teachers our whole life, and we know how little resources they actually have. So making it easy for them, bringing your own money. If you show up at a teacher's door and you say, hey, I want to teach about this part of your program, I have all the money, I have the lesson plan, here's the overview, and this is what I'm going to do, you're good. Pacifica, are you leaving us? Thank you, Pacifica. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you guys. And I put my email in the chat, so if people have further questions that they think of, feel free to email me.
Perfect. Thank you, Pacifica. Awesome. So I think that's one. Have a champion with some authority. I mean, this is like a life situation for any kind of outreach, any kind of science communication. If you can get somebody with authority, have something written into some kind of grant, or like I did, have it written into the mission statement of your professional development society or your professional development person, that can be huge. And then what other things do you think we can take away? What else? What have we learned today? I think also one of the best things is that we didn't really talk about, but I think that Elena kind of alluded to, is that, you're going into communities that you might not be from, you might not understand, you might not speak the language. And what I have done in these situations is go spend time at that class. Before I walked in and taught a class, I was there for a couple of days. So I just went in and hung out with the kids and saw what their learning style was like and saw what they were doing. And it's another one of those situations where you could do an outreach event And when I mean an event, I mean, when you go home for Christmas, when you go home for Thanksgiving, just go into your old high school and talk and give a talk. I mean, like, you guys are all like, had to be like super nerds and were your teacher's favorites, I assume. And so they would love for you to come in and talk. And so, you know, feel free to do that and feel comfortable doing that, because that's a really easy way. When I did it, I asked how many scientists each of the kids had met, and 7 out of the 50 of them that I talked to had met a scientist. And that's either not knowing what a scientist is or literally never reading any type of clinical research science. And so that is one of our big problems as a group of people. And you don't have to prepare to just go meet and talk with kids. You don't have to put an activity together if you can like just go in there and talk about yourself for 20 minutes. That's an easy lift. What other takeaways? Does anyone have any takeaways? Nobody? None of you nerds pulled off any like, oh, this is what everybody's saying.
I took away beg.
Yeah, that's fundraising / begging. That's it. Get your own money if you can.
Oh, downtime.
Yep. It's something that I don't do. I work those little kids to the bone, and that's the other thing is if they hate you at the end of it, you have not done your job. You know what I mean? You really just mostly want them to have fun and think science is cool. So I like that downtime thing. That's something I should do more of.
Draw a scientist test. I've looked for that link.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Oh yeah, assessment. That's another one. Thank you, Helen. Helen's over here talking to me. Yeah, assessment. That is huge, especially, you know, do it early and often, especially if you're doing a pilot program. That's what I would say.
One thing you mentioned, Maddie, too, is that these outreach programs can take many different forms, and you can do anything with it. It can be short, long, it can be remote, or very involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at that. We got teach the standards, have a champion, beg for fundraising, do assessments, and keep in mind that, you know, you've got many different forms that you can take on. I think that's a lot. That's 5 points. I feel good about that. All right, awesome. Anybody else last minute stuff other than just like being wildly grateful for everybody that came in and chatted with us today? Nothing? Sure? All right. Well, this was like my favorite mentor chat so far. Thank you guys so much. I think I learned a lot and appreciate it. We'll see you next month.